right, I'm going to hit the go live button.
Okay.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our live Learn faculty presentation session that we have weekly on Wednesdays. We're so glad that you're here joining us today. Wanted to just remind everyone that as you're watching, you can use that chat function on the YouTube page that you're watching from. And please put any questions that you have in the chat so that we can answer them. Our guest will answer them towards the end of the presentation. So definitely hang on if you have a question that you want answered, but feel free to put them in at any point during the presentation. You won't interrupt us, and then we can put those together and ask them at the end. So please use that with any questions you have. And I also wanted to remind everyone that as you're watching this presentation, we also have a presentation later this afternoon. If you want to tune back in, it's at 2 o'clock, and we will be talking about resumes. So you can spend your day with us here at SAIL. So without further ado, we have a really special guest with us. If you were in the Global Connections flight path during last summer, you may recognize her. We have Martha Ndakalako-Bannikov. She's a PhD candidate in comparative literature here at the University of Oregon. And she's going to talk a little bit about her work with Afro-Futurism. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Megan, and hello, everybody. I'm going to just dive right in, and I will share my screen here and start my slides and tell you a little bit about myself. So hi, my name is Martha Ndakalako-Bannikov, but yeah, please, you can refer to me as Martha in the chat. As Megan said, I am a PhD candidate in comparative literature. I'm from Namibia, and I study Namibian literature, particularly women's writing. And this, interestingly enough, has taken me into the world of digital literature, and my current focus is actually on Namibian Facebook fiction. But today I'm going to be talking about Afrofuturism, and my talk is titled Afrofuturism, Black Speculative Histories and Futures, and the question, what if? So before, let's see here, diving into Afrofuturism. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Namibia. So Namibia is located in on the southwest corner of the continent. It used to be called Southwest Africa, and it was a German colony from 1884 to 1915. So there's a large German settler population, and German is one of the prominent languages that you'll hear there. Namibia was also a South African colony and subject to apartheid rule from 1915 to 1989. And so the language that a lot of people speak there is Afrikaans, which is a South African language, and it's of Dutch origins. But if you were to travel to Namibia, of course, you'd be totally fine speaking English, because English is one of the official languages. Namibia also has like about 24 indigenous languages spoken there. So a lot of the of Namibians, most Namibians you meet will probably be bilingual or multilingual. But so this is sort of a general map, on the left here of where Namibia is located on the continent. And then I just wanted to show you this map here as well. This is Namibia. It's a pretty big country, but in terms of population, there are about 2.5 million people there. So it's not a huge population. And then because I'm working on Facebook fiction in Namibia, I wanted to show you a picture of Windhoek. Windhoek is Namibia's capital city. It is, and I'm showing you the picture because, like I said, I'm working on Facebook fiction, and Facebook fiction happens to, the context is, is the city. And so yeah, I wanted to show you a picture. And you can see here in the corner on the right there, you can sort of get a sense of the German architecture and that German history as well. So let's talk about Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism, so just a quick sort of forecast about how things are going to go. I'll talk about Afrofuturism, then I'll talk a little bit about Afrofuturism in Namibia and sort of the things that I look at. And then I will sort of I'll tell you a little Afrofuturist story written by N.K. Jemisin, and then we'll talk about the themes of Afrofuturism in that particular story. So Afrofuturism, very loosely described, is Black science fiction. It is important and political in that it imagines things like aliens or highly technological futures or post-apocalyptic worlds in order to center Black people who have been historically dehumanized in social conditions of the past and the present. And so it sort of imagines Black people in central positions in these futures or in these speculative pasts. And these representations are usually positive for the most part. At the heart of these imagined, deeply technological worlds is Black experience, in other words. So Black experiences, cultures, and histories are a way of making sense of, these Afrofuturist worlds. Afrofuturism is relevant because on the one hand, when it looks backwards, it imagines what could have been as a way to make sense of both the past and the present. For example, Justina Ireland is an author, and she has written a fantastic series of novels set during the Civil War here in the United States. And what happens in these fantastic, these two novels is at the Battle of Gettysburg, so the battle that sort of determines the Northern victory and then leads to the emancipation of enslaved people in the United States. At this battle, a zombie apocalypse breaks out. So then what happens is because, now, people they cannot fight each other because they're fighting zombies. The question of slavery sort of becomes moot in that, they sort of emancipate the enslaved people. But what really happens is that slavery actually changes form so that Black people, even in this world, are bound to systems of racialized, are still bound to systems of racialized oppression. So that's intense, but the novels are also so much fun because the zombie slayers in these novels are all high school girls. But the novels also reveal hidden parts of US history, and they show us how race operates in different ways. So something about Justina Ireland, she is, of course she writes novels, but she's also a historian. And so the novels are really, really well researched. And, at the end of them, if you want to do a little bit of digging for yourself, she has a little bit of a bibliography showing where she gets her facts from. So Afrofuturism can also look at what will be in a more straightforward sci-fi futuristic sense. It imagines futures as a way for us to better see our present so that we can imagine more equitable futures for the world and for Black people and people of colors. So in essence, it allows us to think differently about questions of injustice and inequity. These representations are important because they are founded in the realities of the past and present social and racial injustices, and they help us to see things a little differently. So what is Afrofuturism? I wanted to give some basic criteria. So just to, kind of just recap. Afrofuturism centers around Black experience, or it's Afrocentric. It centers on positive representations of Black people and people of color. It mixes science fiction with social justice questions, like what would a society without inequality look like, or it changes our perspective of history and the future to highlight inequalities, and in this way helps us see our present differently. It tends to be uplifting, and it reimagines what the past and imagines the future from a Black perspective. And of course, it has to do with science and technology. So I wanted to give some examples of Afrofuturism in Namibia. So on the left here is an image of a photographer, Namakua Mutse, and this is her self-portrait. And Namakua Mutse's photography uses Afrofuturism as a way of literally seeing the world. So she considers Afrofuturism as a way to see the future through a Black cultural lens. So she plays in her photo series, she tends to play with tradition, and you can see this sort of in this photograph here, that's called Afrofuturism. It's part of her series Afrofuturism Meets the Awambo People. So she sort of emphasizes vision, but using these glasses. But then the people in this image are also wearing clothing, and they have like the basket. These are things that signify Awambo traditional culture. And here is some of her other work. So on the right here is Omwenyo, and then in the middle is Bright Eyes, and then on the left is Omwenyo, and then in the middle Bright Eyes, and then to the right is Breathe. And of Breathe, that series, she said, Breathe is somewhat of a storytelling photo series that especially explores steampunk. It is about a young Black man navigating his way through a post-apocalyptic world in search of civilization. Every breath taken is his journey, in his journey is an indication of resilience. So another artist that works on Afrofuturism is Masia Mbewe. And Masia Mbewe is an Afrofuturist writer, photographer, and activist, and they live in Namibia. So they're a visual artist. And I'm going to talk a little bit about their exhibition, the Afro-Futurist Village. But, and this was the Afro-Futurist Village, I believe they made it in about 2017 or 18, and their concept of Afrofuturism has changed a little bit. They were no longer really like the idea of Afrofuturism as a way to describe queer, Black, and African futurist identities. So they talk about queer futurism. So it's a branch of Afrofuturism, but also like an important distinction. Mbewe states that, to quote them, "I've always had this weird vision of a space where all Black people, all types of Black people existed. I mostly worked with queer and differently abled people because when we talk about Afrofuturism, they're not always the first people that come to mind." So I wanted to show some of the images from their exhibition, the Afrofuturist Village. Mbewe, so as you can see here, Mbewe thinks about an Afro or queer futurism that is not set in space, so not out in the universe somewhere, but it's located here on Earth. So they use the Namibian landscape to imagine this Afrofuturist village where all types of Black people can live, be themselves, and be accepted. So her vision of the future really is a future in which like the politics of Blackness and race is not necessary, because people are accepted and they're accepted and they live, these lives of equity and inclusion. So her vision is very, very utopian. So these are some of the more formal artworks. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the more informal Afrofuturist work that is being done in Namibia. So these images showed up last year, around about the time when the pandemic started. This Namibian company, Rex Animation Studio, sort of did this series asking the question, what if Namibia had superheroes? Here's what we think they would look like. So you can sort of see in these two images, they really draw from African cultural traditions, and in the right, very specifically from Namibian cultural traditions. So the woman on the right here is a Himba woman, and I know it's a Namibian depiction of heroes because she's wearing her cape is actually the Namibian flag. So on the one hand, you get a sense of culture as being significant to these superheroes, but also nationalism. And here's some other images. So they did this on the left, this image of a man with a mask that is the Namibian flag. And then here on the right, you see, that this person also has the Namibian flag. So very much Namibian heroes, but also very much culturally rooted. And so Rex Animation Studio also did what I would think of as a Facebook graphic novel. Or sorry, maybe graphic novel's too big. It was maybe a comic that sort of used images and text to sort of talk through, to tell a story. And the story they told was of a cyborg, a Namibian cyborg named James, who sort of goes around Namibia rescuing trafficked children. So in one of his trips rescuing these children, he gets hurt and he ends up in the hospital, but he saves the children. And then in part 5 here is the quote. These children come to visit him in the hospital, and it says, "The boys have all been to the hospital to see James. The social workers think somehow it will help them. I guess seeing a man that looks like you kick ass changes you." So that sentence, seeing a man that looks like you kick ass changes you, is sort of, I think, the underlying mission of Afrofuturism, to sort of, give positive representation so that we can not only affect how people of color and Black people see their own cultural traditions that in the past have could have been depicted negatively, but also change perceptions as well. So going forward, I'm going to move into telling you about the short story. So I'm going to tell you the short story of valedictorian. I'm actually just going to recount the story for you. I would like you to read it, and you can. Valedictorian by N.K. Jemisin is actually available online. You can just Google it, and you can read it there. And if you're going to do that, you might as well read everything by N.K. Jemisin because she is fantastic. The story can also be found in her short story collection, How Long Till Black Future Month, if you like to read by text, like text as in like paper, not text as in on your phone, but you can do that too. So I'm going to start by telling you sort of like the overview of what, like where the story is set in the future. And then I'll tell you about, the specifics of the main character, the protagonist. So valedictorian is set, like I said, in the future, in the far future, in the US. And in this future, artificial technology or artificial intelligence, in the form of nanotechnology has taken over the world using Bluetooth-like technology to enter our brains and basically take over our bodies. And so, in other words, these nanotech or technological microbes sort of become aware, and then they invade people and then, sort of take over the world that way. But the beginnings of this happens like in the big cities, and it happens in public libraries, because public libraries use technology, but of course it's not the most updated and recent technology. So their firewalls aren't great. And so these nanotech microbes can sort of like, sort of circumvent the firewalls and so invade the bodies. But then what happens is by the time like non-invaded humans realize what is happening, of course, these tech people have already kind of spread, but nevertheless, of course, they go to war. So, we go to war, and humans, of course, they lose the war, because I mean, if there's a human being with, that's able to move in and out of tech, with their minds, yeah, humans are going to lose the war. So they lose the war. And initially, so let me just backtrack a little bit. Initially, when the war begins, people build firewalls around the inner cities to sort of keep these tech people in, and that doesn't work. And so what they do is that as they start to lose the war, they build these firewalls around their towns. So they build these towns that have firewalls around them, or walls around them that they call firewalls, to sort of keep people in and tech people out. So hence the image over here. So this is sort of what cities in this future look like. Human beings live in these tiny towns spread across the United States that are protected by these firewalls. So in these particular towns, people live in fear because they've been living in these towns at this point for generations, and they don't really know what the world outside looks like. And they have an agreement with these tech people so that the tech people never come into the town and the town people never go out of the towns. And the only way to actually live in this town and to continue on in this way is that in these towns, they foster mediocrity. So they don't want anyone asking too many questions. They don't want somebody too smart to go digging or upset the status quo, because that just, that doesn't work for them. And so people like that get pushed out of town. But they also have like a very formal way to get rid of people who are not mediocre. And this is an agreement that they have with these tech people. So their system is this. So every year, the tech people behind the wall, beyond the wall, demand a tribute of children. After each high school graduation, they will take 10% of the worst performing students of a class, plus one, and that one is the valedictorian. So they take the 10% of like the worst students, and then they take the valedictorian, the best and the brightest. The thing that the people in the town don't know is what happens to these people who go beyond the wall, because they don't come back and they never see them again, and they never hear from them again. So there's a lot of fear attached to the tribute. And so people try to avoid being either the worst, and they avoid trying to be being the best. And there are multiple ways to do this. So one of the ways that people do it is women can avoid being tributed by getting pregnant in their final year of high school. So in this world, high school pregnancy is not a bad thing, because then you are contributing another human being to the society, and you get to stay with your family, and you don't have to worry about being tributed and never seeing your family again. The second thing, of course, as I said, is not to excel, because if you do, then you will become the valedictorian and you'll be the smartest person in your class, and the smartest person always gets taken no matter what. So our protagonist's name is Zinle Nkosi. She is Black. She lives in a town located in Middle America somewhere. And despite this world that she lives in, she excels at everything because she lives by 3 rules. And the story, if you read it, begins by listing Zinle's 3 rules. Her first rule is that she will never, ever give less than her best at anything she tries to do. Her second rule is that she will not live in fear. And her third rule is that she will be herself no matter what. So she's that student that wins awards she wins awards with her work. She's the student who corrects her teacher and shows them why they're wrong. So of course, her teachers hate her and she gets into trouble quite a bit. And her fellow students don't like her, so she gets beat up quite a bit. But she lives by a code. And so of course, the beings that live beyond the firewall, as you can imagine, they're technological. And these towns, by the way, aren't technological. They try to be as least tech as possible because they're avoiding these beings. But the tech people monitor high school grades because they want the tributes, right? And just before graduation, they send a representative to talk to the valedictorian, that student that will excel. And one pays a visit to Zinle. And despite her number 2 rule, that is like, don't live in fear, she's terrified. This being who comes to visit her is named Lemieux. And he frightens her because while he looks human, he doesn't behave like a human being. He doesn't fidget. He doesn't do small talk. He sits unnaturally still. So he doesn't really, there's no body language that we would recognize as body language. So Lemieux invites her to come and live beyond the wall. And it's not really an invitation because if she passes and becomes valedictorian, she's going to be taken. But he comes to sort of offer her, he sort of offers her the option to sort of continue, is what he says. And he does this because he doesn't want her fear to overwhelm her. And this has happened in the past to potential valedictorians. Like they want to excel, but then, and they do, and then the thought of being tributed, they do things they try to fail or they hurt themselves. So he doesn't want her to do something stupid to avoid being taken. And so he explains to her some of what will happen. Lemieux's people are inviting her into their world so that she can continue being the best, being curious, in essence, excelling. They want her to continue being herself. Unlike her hometown, they're okay with her being different. As long as she accepts that despite their differences, Lemieux's people are exactly that. They're people. And then Lemieux explains to Zinle that his people are okay with the firewalls around all these various towns in the United States. They're okay with them coming down just as soon as people living within the firewall start accepting their valedictorians. So instead of letting these tech people just take their best and brightest, why not keep them and find ways to have these people improve things in the town, or accept that these people who excel or are interested in difference are okay, The idea is that if the people within the town can accept those who are different within their communities, if they can start valuing them and start fighting for them, they are more likely to work to accept those who are different outside of their communities. And they are more likely to allow themselves to adapt to living in a world full of difference. So to sort of conclude the story here, Zinle will be taken if she is valedictorian, or she will sabotage her chances at becoming that valedictorian and find a way to stay in her town or find a way to in her life. But if she is taken and cannot accept Lemieux's people or adapt to them once she's outside of the wall, she will end up like the other tributes. And you can sort of imagine what happens to these other tributes. Lemieux's people are an AI human mix. And while the AI part of them can survive comfortably in cyberspace, they need bodies to live and experience the real world. So you can sort of see where this is going. So the question that I ask for you to consider, and maybe, you know, and the story asks the same question, is what does Zinle do? So I wanted to talk through some of the Afrofuturist elements in the story. And the first one I want to sort of emphasize is the Black AI human cyborg people. And I put cyborg in a question mark because we're used to cyborgs as like sort of robotic, you know, robot slash human like mixes, but this is like sort of technological like inside of you. But anyway, so the first thing is the Black AI human cyborg people. So when the AI started invading human bodies back when they were doing it through the libraries at the very beginning, this happened, like I said, in the inner city. And inner cities, as you know, are places where Black people tend to live, where people of color and immigrants tend to live, etc. So you can sort of imagine that this early generation of AI tech people, you can sort of imagine what they look like. They were people of color. So this leads me to my second sort of Afrofuturist element and observation, is that the firewalls that were built after, you know, once people started realizing what was happening, and the war that followed was, of course, a racialized war, simply because these tech people were people of color. So these wars mimicked race wars, or were in essence race wars. So they also played on those prejudices, as you can imagine. The third thing that I found important for me was Zinle's name. Her name is a South African name, and it's Zulu. And in Zulu, it's an affirmation. It means beautiful child. And this is an important storytelling connection that N.K. Jemisin does, because it connects this particular American story to the African continent and to experiences of race and Blackness there as well. And then the final element, and this is the element I sort of want to hear from you, is what do you see as Afrofuturist in the story that I just told you? So I'd like to hear in the QA sort of like what you think, you know, what you noticed, but also, you know, as you read, think about, as you read the story, and I hope you really do, consider, you know, what Afrofuturist elements, you know, you notice as you read. So to sort of conclude, this talk went a little quicker than I thought, but to sort of conclude, I wanted to also leave you, before we do the Q&A, I just want to leave you with some, for those of you interested in Afrofuturism, some ways to sort of explore it. Like I said, you can read anything by N.K. Jemisin. And her short story, Red Dirt Witch, is another one that I really, really like. And you can also Google that and find it online. And then Octavia Butler is the mother of Afrofuturism. And anything that she has written is fantastic, but Wild Seed is one of my favorite novels, so check that out. And then Nnedi Okorafor has written a novel, a series of novels, a trilogy, Binti. And Binti, I love Binti because it's set in my country, Namibia, and it's far in the future. And Binti is a Himba girl. And Himba, if you think back to when I was talking about Namibian superheroes and that woman, you know, with the first woman with a cape, she's Himba. And so Binti is this Himba girl who goes out into space and in essence saves the universe. So they're fantastic. And just so you know, I think Hulu or one of those, you know, they're making it into a movie. So you obviously have to read the novels first. And then of course, Janelle Monae, if you're gonna look into Afrofuturism, you have to, like, you know, check out Janelle Monae, particularly her Many Moons music video / short film with all its beautiful Black cyborgs. Okay, so that is pretty much my talk. I will open it up to Q&A, and I can clarify questions or clarify some points or questions. I will stop sharing my screen, and yeah. Are there any questions or things that I can clarify for anybody?
Yeah, Martha, thank you so much. So many wonderful suggestions for reading and for exploring and for going further. So really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got some great questions here, and I'll just kind of go through them. So when did Afrofuturism begin? Kind of what's its? I know you gave us a little bit of a history, but
yeah, that's a good question. So Afrofuturism, the term Afrofuturism was coined by a man, Mark Derry, and I think it was like in the 90s. I want to say 1994. I'm terrible with dates, but yeah, he coined the term. But Afrofuturist work, and just so you know, workers in Afrofuturism sort of have a problem, with the idea that this person coins it and it begins. But Afrofuturism work has been going on for a while. And I mentioned Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler wrote her first novel in 1976. And then there were people like Sun Ra who were, creating music. And so that sort of Black Americans thinking about science fiction and technology and where Black people fit into this story or don't fit into the story. Because for Sun Ra, he was like, this world isn't for Black people. Black people are really from elsewhere, and we need to figure out a way to go back, and go back as in like, we don't belong on this planet. We're from somewhere else. So he played with that idea. There are Afrofuturists, of course, who are like, no, I mean, this is our world too, and we're going to fight for it, as well. But yeah, so the origins are complicated, but I'm having a hard time remembering when Sun Ra created his work. But the mother of Afrofuturism, Octavia Butler, began her novels in 1976. So you can sort of see that there's a huge trajectory of this kind of writing.
Has it, over the course of maybe from the 70s till currently, have there been sort of big changes or shifts in the kind of work that's being done?
Yes, there have been changes. So one of the changes I sort of referred to a little bit was, so like Mark Derry's notion of Afrofuturism, like he was like, part of the issue with Mark Derry is that he is a white guy looking at Black work and saying, this is what it is. And people are like, he doesn't quite maybe see it as clearly as that. So people have sort of redefined what Afrofuturism is. One of the redefinitions that I'm really interested in is one that's actually happening pretty recently. So on the continent, on the African continent, African artists and writers sort of say Afrofuturism is very much a African American, or it happens. It's written by Black people who are living in the West, and so it sort of engages that question of the slave experience and the erasure that happens as a result of enslavement. Like, how do you think about your past and your present when you don't know who your ancestors are, right? So Afrofuturism sort of addresses that question, and it thinks about the continent. It makes connections to the continent as well, in valuable ways. But African writers are like, we do futuristic work too, but it doesn't quite do that. I mean, we're not as anxious about, having lost a past, but we are sort of thinking about, future in the context of like cultural things. So you sort of see that work in Namakua Mutse's work, where she's like, looking at the future through a Black cultural lens. That is one way of doing it. And then you also see it in Masia Letimbewe's work, where she's like, Afrofuturism doesn't quite work, because, I'm thinking about queer identities. But recently, like authors like Nnedi Okorafor, who wrote Binti, she coined the term African futurism to sort of make that, distinction. And so with her, African futurism is very much, has nothing to do with the West, is located on the continent, or these Africans go out into space somewhere, So Binti is the perfect example of that kind of work. She's Namibian, she's ethnic, and then she goes into space and saves the world and the universe. So yeah, so it's one of the important movements to me in Afrofuturism and African futurism.
Awesome, thank you.
Great questions.
Yeah. Okay, what is your favorite Afrofuturistic work and or author?
Okay, that's difficult. Okay, of course I have to say Octavia Butler. Wild Seed is absolutely, like, you have to read Octavia Butler. She's one of those people where you pick up a novel and it's not like there's a ton of description. It's like you land in a world, these people are already doing things and you're like, what is going on? And then you just get a page and you're like sucked in and you can't put it down. She's a fantastic writer. So Octavia Butler, Wild Seed is set, at the beginnings of slavery. It's set in Africa, but I have another. N.K. Jemisin, of course, is one of my favorites. Is a recent favorite, and she wrote this trilogy called the Broken Earth series. It's won a ton of awards, and they're like huge, thick novels, and I love huge, thick novels. But it's set in a world where the moon gets taken away, and the world is like this really messed up place, and it's just beautiful. So my favorite is I don't have a favorite. I love too many. So N.K. Jemisin, Octavia Butler. I love Janelle Monae, of course. Nnedi Okorafor, anything by Nnedi Okorafor, yeah. I could go on, but
yeah. Let's start the reading list here.
Yeah.
And I know you touched on Sun Ra a little bit and Janelle Monae, but maybe this would be a good place to talk about. So the question is Afrofuturism only literature or books, or can other kinds of themes be found in like art and music?
Yes, so Afrofuturism is broad. My research is obviously more focused on the literature, but I want to say it was it definitely is music, it's art, it's fashion, it's just about anything that artists want to work with. So I mean, for instance, the things that I talked about, Namafua Mutse's work, she's a photographer. And so she takes photographs and, sort of uses that, photography to create a futuristic lens, like that image. I included, sorry, I'm going to share my screen real quick because I wanted to come back to this image here. See here, if I can do this. Here, Omwenyo, can you see that, Megan? Is my, okay, great. Yeah, Omwenyo, it's futuristic. It's there's nothing particularly special about what's going on in this image, but the use of the black body, the drinking container, that is a very cultural thing, and her photography is fantastic, and then Masia Latimbewe, that is actually a video series that you can see. It's not, so she's a visual artist. She uses and they're on YouTube, so you can actually Google them and watch the video series. But yeah, artists are doing all sorts of things. And then of course, Janelle Monae is a musician, and her work is, futuristic. And I just mentioned Many Moons, but you can, anything by Janelle Monae, but Many Moons, because I am fascinated by cyborgs. So especially Black futuristic, Black feminist cyborgs. So, but yeah, it's very, very broad. But yeah, I tend to, because I'm a literary scholar, I tend to like stick with the literature. But, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, so it sounds like if you're out there and watching and curious about where Afrofuturism shows up, it sounds like maybe Google would be a fun place to go and just write it fashion or whatever it is you're interested in.
And there are some fantastic, if you want to just start, easily, you can on YouTube, just what is Afrofuturism? And there's some fantastic videos out there that just sort of send you in all these different places, and you can sort of figure out, what you like, and you will find an Afrofuturist, doing something that, sort of resonates with you.
Cool. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. So, it says, you said that this genre has a lot of parallels with real life, like with racial injustice and oppression. So what can we learn? And there's kind of two questions, so I'll put them together. How can we kind of learn and apply the things in these books to fight against racial injustice or address some of the things that are coming up in the real world?
That's a very good question, and it's a difficult question because I think it's also very personal. I think what Afrofuturism allows you to do is to see, to actually get a sense of these injustices. I talked about the firewalls. So I've taught valedictorian before, and we've read, in my class, we talked about the firewalls and how they emerged in the inner city. And like I said, this is happening generations in the future, right? This isn't a world that we even recognize. We don't live in walled cities. But the students in my class were like, this was happening in the height of of Trump's presidency, when the walls were being built, on the border walls were being built. So students were immediately, the idea of the firewall to keep difference out, or keep, difference in, was something that immediately resonated, and it just sort of came up in conversations. It was something that I'm like, I was noticing, inner cities, Black people, racial wars, and I wasn't even thinking about the politics of the inner city. People are settling, and cities, and I'm thinking about like how these inner cities happen, and how these communities sort of get broken up by policies that sort of serve to like disrupt them all the time. And that's where I was going. Students immediately noticed, well, this is political in a different way. So, which is why and they pointed to, this is how it applies to our world right now. These border walls are actually being built, they're being debated in politics today. And so kind of raise an awareness for them. Where you take it, that becomes personal. That's up to you, right? That becomes a social justice question. But I think the important thing is that it sort of helps you to see, that this world that we live in is a lot more complicated than we think, So just to go back to Justina Ireland, that author that I mentioned, who goes back to the Civil War, as a way of thinking about race. Like I said, because the zombies happen, suddenly you can't just be fighting each other. You got to fight these zombies, otherwise everybody dies. So they emancipate the slaves. But what happens is, because race is not, it's not a system, it's an ideology, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of structuring the world. These emancipated slaves become the people who become the frontline fighters against the zombies, so that other people can live comfortable lives. So you sort of see how, it's not just, a system where, we can just sort of change the system. It's an ideology, it's insidious, it changes, it becomes something else, so that oppression can continue, and so that people who benefit from oppressions can continue to benefit from them. So it really, so yes, it's a zombie apocalypse, and it's fun because, they're slaying zombies, but at the same time, you're like, oh, racism it's messed up, in these particular ways, and you sort of see it, But yeah, hopefully that addresses that question. But yeah, I think it's a deeply personal question. It's a question of social justice, and once you see it, the question then becomes, what do you do? What are you going to do?
Thanks for addressing that. I think it is a complex one. Okay, so you talked a little bit about. Okay, I have a question, because this is for me. Because I'm thinking about going back to the Civil War, and I imagine a lot of our students have watched Hamilton, or maybe you're watching Bridgerton, and thinking about how, and those are very much in the past, right? But they're kind of reimaginings maybe of how past events have happened. Does that relate, or is there a conversation between sort of like imagining the future versus imagining the past, in terms of kind of how history went and how race plays into it, or how it could have been different?
In terms of Afrofuturism? Okay, so I haven't seen Hamilton.
Yeah, I wonder, because I'm thinking about how like future, how like imagining things into the future versus kind of like looking at events in the past through a different lens, if that's something that Afrofuturism covers, or if that's
absolutely covers it. Because I mean, Afrofuturism is a way to see differently. It's a way to see our past and our, to think about the past, so that we can see our present, so that we can sort of better understand what is happening now, and then maybe better think about where we're going, or to imagine a future. But this imagined future always sort of reflects on what is happening now, what world are we living in now, so that we can maybe make a better future, or so maybe we can target that particular future. Octavia Butler's work is, she thinks about the future, and her futures, some of them are like the world, it's a devastating world where Black people are surviving, but it's sort of like, let's maybe not do that. Let's maybe think about the world that we live in and try to avoid that. But her work is also one of her amazing novels, one of the most amazing, most painful of her novels is Kindred. And in Kindred, the protagonist, Dana, gets sucked back into her past, so it's 1985, I think, is what this woman lives, or she's in her present, in now, in our now, sort of. And she's always interested in her ancestors and tracing her history. She's Black, so these are people that were enslaved, and she knows, and so she gets sucked into this past where she actually meets her grandfather, her great 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 grandfather and grandmother, and she finds out that her grandfather was an enslaved person, a slave owner, and he raped her great grandmother, and that's where she comes from. So Octavia Butler says, I wrote this novel not because, this history is there. You can sort of, these histories, but she wanted us to feel the history. She wanted you to get a sense of, you're angry at these people because you're like, why didn't these enslaved people resist more? Or why didn't they do more to get out of enslavement? But slavery the system works on you so that you can accept it, So she wanted you to feel the novel, so that you can think differently about the past, so that you can think differently about the present, and so you can think differently about the future. So Afrofuturism definitely is connecting, speculative histories, and speculative futures, in these ways.
Thank you. Thanks for talking a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you talked about how Afrofuturism looks like kind of in the US and the West, and maybe how it shows up in Africa. This question is wondering if there are other places in the world that have had an influence, and are there places where it's really popular?
Okay. Yeah, this is probably a shortcoming of my own research. I'm very much focused on Black speculative, Afrofuturism. So yeah, I know that's a huge thing in the Caribbean. I know that there is a branch of, I wouldn't say, so there's Afrofuturism. I tend to feel like magic realism is related. It's not the same thing, but that kind of drawing in the way people think about the world, so that it's not just a straightforward narrative of realism, because these works help you to think differently about your reality, so like in Argentina there is magic realism work, like authors like, oh, I'm not going to remember this guy's name. Anyway, yeah, so it shows up in different parts of the world. I like I said, my focus is on Africa. I know that it's a big thing in the Caribbean and here in the United States, and I know, of course, that there are, in the West, in Europe, there are Afrofuturist writers and African futurist writers. It would be an interesting thing to find out, if there are other places. So I will be looking into that. Feel free to email me. It'll encourage me to look, and I'll come up with an answer for you.
They're good questions.
Yeah, very good questions.
I think that's it for right now. I did want to ask, a lot of times when we do these kinds of presentations, if you're willing to share, we like to share with our students kind of what your path was to where you are now, and if people are thinking about college or about school, or what they might want to study. It's always interesting to hear what people's journeys were and kind of what they studied and how their interests led them to what they're working on now.
Okay, sure. I'd be happy to. So I'm not a traditional scholar. I'm not a traditional student either. I went to school years and years ago. I started my undergraduate in Texas, in Dallas, and I was studying literary studies there. And then school was expensive, so I dropped out. And then about 6 years ago, it's been 6 years now, yeah, or 7 years ago, I decided to finish my undergrad, and then took a class that changed my life, and then applied to go to grad school. So here's why this class changed my life. Because it's why I went to grad school, and why I'm doing the work that I'm doing now. Like I said, I grew up in Namibia. I grew up in so Namibia became independent in 1990, so it's only 30 years ago. Is that right? I'm terrible at math. 1990, okay? Namibia became independent in 1990. And I sort of grew up in the last years of Namibia's war for independence. So my parents would take me to, and I mean, I grew up in a safe, you know, in a relatively safe town, but I was aware of what was going on in the rest of the country. Of course, you couldn't not be. And I went with my parents to the political rallies and, you know, all these events that were happening, you know, trying to get, you know, the world to recognize the injustices going on in the country and trying to get apartheid eradicated in Namibia. So Namibia becomes independent in 1990. At these political rallies, there was always this conversation like, we're going to change the world. You know, once we become independent, we're going to like break from South Africa. We're going to do all these huge radical changes. But independence happens, and then, and I remember as a kid just like waiting to see like, okay, so what now? You know, what are these huge changes going to look like? Nothing really happened. I mean, the stuff of government happened, right? I mean, you know, we have a national anthem. I continued to go to school. There was no truth or reconciliation, anything. And I just kind of, it was just kind of like anticlimactic in a way. I mean, I don't want to diminish how important independence was, you know, because it ended the war, exiled peoples came back, but it was just that like, you know, that hope of like, you know, something's going to be super different. My life didn't feel all that different really. I went to high school, I went to, you know, then I moved to the United States, went on with my life. But even as I was studying, I always wondered like, what was that about? What was apartheid about? Why the whole war? Why would they want to take over Namibia and oppress us, you know? And then I'd read these novels. And then I was also, of course, interested in history because I was like, and you know, why when I'm looking for Namibian history, the only history I can find is colonial history. Like anytime I read about anything African, it's like they were oppressed, you know, and so they had to fight their way out of it, you know, and their cultures are primitive and all of these things. So I wanted to, so these things sort of like sat in the back of my head. And anytime I read a novel or joined a group, like a reading group, because I would always join reading groups with girls and friends of mine. I always wondered where are the Black people? Because we always ended up reading things like Jane Austen, you know. And so we'd read, of course, you know, about Mr. Darcy and how handsome he is. And then my friends would be like, oh my God, I'd love to live in that world and wear those, you know, ridiculous dresses and, you know, have men treat me like a princess. And I'd be like, but if I were to go into that world and wear those ridiculous, would I wear those ridiculous dresses? Would people treat me with that kind of respect, you know, that they treat these women? I mean, where are the Black people? So when I went back to school to sort of finish my degree, like what, 7 or 8 years ago, I took a class in theory and I read post-colonial theory. And in post-colonial theory, there was a writer who was asking exactly those questions. He was reading Jane Austen and he was like, Mansfield Park, that particular novel, the reason why those people could live in that way was because they had plantations in the Americas. And those plantations were supporting that lifestyle. And so that's where the Black people were. And that was eye-opening for me, you know? And then I was like, so what happened in Namibia? So all those questions that I had that I just sort of like put in the background came flooding back and I just had to know. I had to like figure out, you know, what did this history mean, you know? So I went to grad school. Then I answered my questions. And then I was like, but I'm still interested in literature and I want to know, what is the Namibian literary tradition and all of this stuff. So yeah, then I started, you know, exploring other questions too. But yeah, that's how I sort of ended up here. So yeah, I'm a very non-traditional student. So I'm always like, I'll say this, grad school was really, really hard for me because it had been, gosh, maybe 15 years between my undergrad and then coming back to school and going to grad school. And there were times that I didn't want to, it was kind of easy to want to give up because grad school is a different language altogether. People talk differently. I had to learn how to understand how to read these things. But I'm just saying it because I know the transition, you know, from one form of education to another, from, you know, and I'm a first generation student as well. Don't give up. Give your mind a chance to adjust. You know, you just go and slay and you know and do your thing and don't, you know, just keep it up. Because I mean, if I can do it, anyone can do it, right? Because I mean, you know, it was an experience, you know, learning to like understand what people were actually just saying to me. And I'm glad I didn't, like, you know, there were a couple of times I wanted to drop out. I'm glad I didn't do it. So But yeah, that's me.
Thank you for sharing and for your words of advice at the end, because I think this is a time when people really are starting to look towards graduation and what they're going to do afterwards. And I think those are important words to hear. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, world's a tough place, but you know.
Is there anything else that you would like to add or share? We can, for those of you watching, we can add some links in the YouTube description to Martha's department. And if you're interested in contacting them at the U of O, and we can write out some of the titles of the books that were suggested or some of the music so that you can go back and check it out. But yeah, anything to add?
No, I think that's everything. This was fantastic. To the students, I wish I could see you, but you know, oh well. Please, if you have questions, I'm very friendly, so email me. I will email you back, you know, if you want to hear more about Afrofuturism or whatever. But yeah, but thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for joining us. It was really wonderful. So yes, to everyone watching, we will see you next week. And to Martha and to our college students who are in the background here, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.